大家平安。
Greetings of peace to everyone.
那这个星期是我们墨尔本教会的宗教教育周。
So this week is for Melbourne Church our RE week.
礼拜一我就从箴言当中来谈怎么教养小孩。
And on Monday, I've touched on the lessons on parenting from the Book of Proverbs.
那我们也曾经讲过，箴言他赞同说要管教小孩。
So we've already covered that from the Book of Proverbs. It teaches us that it is good to discipline and teach our children.
那当然，管教的时候一定会造成他们的愁苦。
However, when a discipline is put upon our children, then naturally, then they will be sorrowful.
但是神也会管教我们，那动机是神希望我们在神的圣洁上面有份。
However, we see how for us, God also disciplines us as well. And the purpose is so that we have a part in his righteousness.
同样，我们在管教小孩动机也是希望他们跟神的圣洁有份。
And therefore, in the same manner, the reason why we discipline our children is for the purpose so that they are able to have a part in God's righteousness.
那这种动机所管教的结果就是结出平安的果子。
And the result or consequences of disciplining our children is that they will be able to bear fruits of peace.
当然手段我们现在就不能像过去用体罚的方式。
And we also touched on how when we discipline our children, the methods that we use to discipline them would need to be different from the past where it involves corporal punishment.
如果这样的话，我们可能父母要吃上官司那当然是不好，绝对是不好的啦。
Because if we applied the same method of disciplining our children as in time past, then perhaps the parents would be needing to face lawsuits.
那但是原则差不多，就是说你剥夺或是限制他们所喜欢的。
However, the principle underlying the discipline is still the same, which is you take away the things that they enjoy.
或是第二就是加增他们所不喜欢的，可以忍受的痛苦。
Or you add to them the things that they dislike to the extent that they can endure.
那我们根据这两个原则来，当我们小孩需要管教的时候，我们就要放胆的去管教他们。
And therefore, as long as we align with these underlying two principles in the way we discipline children,
那避免他们走向所谓的永刑走向阴间
So when we discipline our children is to avoid them going towards the path of eternal condemnation in the future.
当然箴言也这么说孩童是愚蒙的愚蒙的。
And the Book of Proverbs also teaches us that our children can be foolish.
对，那所以你用讲的没有用，还有时候还是要用处罚就是我们讲所谓的管教的方式，才能够把那个愚蒙赶走了
And therefore, sometimes the way we teach them is not enough merely by using a verbal method. And therefore, sometimes we need to take the step of disciplining them so that we remove and take away that foolishness out of them.
我就讲说有一个姐妹，当她小孩不乖的时候，她就取消她的全家的交友
So I gave an example how there was a sister when her child misbehaved, and therefore she then canceled their family outing.
那个饭店都订好了，然后可能这个就钱就没有了
They already booked in the outing. They already booked the restaurant's appointment, and therefore they had to forfeit that, and so that means they had to give up the money.
对，我们讲的是那个 hotel 了hotel.
Oh, sorry, the hotel accommodation is already booked.
我们看一下这个箴言22章15节
Let's turn to Proverbs chapter 22.
第15节
Verse 15. Proverbs 22, verse 15. Foolishness is bound up in the heart of the child. The rod of correction will drive it far from him.
所以他这里说这个小孩子跟那个渔网是绑在一起的他这样讲
And here it describes how foolishness is bound up together in the heart of a child.
那怎么把他赶走呢？就是他说用杖管教的杖
And how do you drive foolishness far away from this child? It is through the rod of correction.
当然还有一个原因就是因为小孩子他可塑性很大，所以从小去管教他们，他们很快就可以走上正确的道路
And the other reason is some children are very easily they're easily moldable, and therefore we just need to discipline them with little effort, then they can correct themselves to the right path.
我们注意看到，如果说小孩子，譬如说在5岁到国小6年级以前这段，其实是一个管教的黄金期了
So we take note that from the age of 5 years old and until they reach year 6 in the primary school, this is actually the golden time, a best time for us to discipline our children.
好，我们看这个19章箴言19章
Let's refer to Proverbs chapter 19,
第18节。
verse 18. Proverbs chapter 19, verse 18. Chasten your son while there is hope, and do not set your heart on his destruction.
所以他说趁有指望，代表说还有希望，或者他还可以改变的时候，当然就要管教他们
Chasten your son while there is hope, while there is hope, while there is opportunity.
就是说，就像我刚才讲的这个5岁一直到这个小学6年级这段是一个黄金期
And so, as mentioned just now, when they're 5 years old and until they hit grade 6 in primary school, that is the perfect time for us to teach them.
那时候你有时候父母讲的话，他会害怕，会听
Because at this stage in their life, they are still quite fearful of their parents, or they would listen to their parents.
但是当他们到了所谓的 high school 的年纪的时候，你就不能用这个管教的方法了
However, when they reach the high school stage, then we won't be able to use the same method to discipline them.
一个可能效果会反而造成小孩子的这种沮丧
Because with the same method of disciplining them, it may cause a lot of despair and negative reaction in our children.
所以我们看一下这个以弗所书第6章
And if we turn to the book of Ephesians chapter 6,
他第4节就说，你们做父亲的不要惹儿女的气了
Ephesians chapter 4 verse 6, here it says that my apologies, chapter 6 verse 4, that as parents we should not provoke our children to wrath.
对，但是我惹孩童气，有时候就是说他这个年纪，有时候你用这种对待小孩的方式对待他，当然他会生气
And so for children in their older years, if you treat them just like a little child, then it would provoke them to anger.
所以这段期间你也可以看到父母跟这些小孩子常常会有一些冲突
And so it's often observed that in this teenage period, adolescent period, that there will be often conflicts between parents and their children.
那这个真的是很不容易的地方
And so this is actually quite a challenging time.
当然，如果如果我们再看到那个亚伯拉罕在跟这个以撒的这个互动的过程
However, if we can learn from the interaction between Abraham and Isaac,
你看那个时候就创世记22章嘛你看那个时候以撒可以背柴，大概青春期这个时候了
And so it's in Genesis chapter 22. So at this point in time, Isaac, because he was able to carry the wood, so he would be in his adolescent years.
那他有意见啊，什么火跟柴都有，那羊羔在哪里呢
And we can also see that Isaac would start to question that I can see there is the fire and the wood, but where is the offering?
那个时候你看亚伯拉罕没有说小孩子不要当这个少讲话能听我的就对了你看亚伯拉罕没有这样讲
We can see how Abraham didn't just dismiss Isaac's comment to just say just listen to me and that's right.
然后呢他就说这个神必预备，对不对
But Abraham told him that the Lord will provide, God will provide.
但是在这个希伯来书11章他有更多的 表达亚伯拉罕怎么去解释，怎么样让他儿子顺服这件事情。
And then in Hebrews chapter 11, then it elaborates further how Abraham was able to explain the matter so that Isaac can learn to be submissive.
好，那我想这个部分我在星期六再讲比较详细一点好了哈。
So on this, I will elaborate more in detail on Saturday.
好，我们来看回来这个箴言的第29章。
Coming back to Proverbs chapter 29.
箴言29章的第15节。
Verse 15. Proverbs chapter 29, verse 15. The rod and rebuke give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings shame to his mother.
这边有一句话叫做放纵，它的意思是说让小孩子let a children left to himself 哈，它是直译是这样直译啦，直接翻译是这样翻译哈。
So there's a phrase here, a child left to himself. The direct translation is
意思说好像就是让他独自一个人在那边哈，那中文是给他翻成放纵了，中文是翻成放纵哈。
So in the Chinese translation, this phrase is rendered as indulging the child, but in the English translation, it is actually the literal translation, which is a child that is left on his own, left to himself.
对，那这个 left alone 的意思哈，它的原文就是 left alone 意思，它的意思是说哈，就是没有去照顾他，没有去注意他的意思啊。
And therefore, the original text is a child left alone, so where the parents did not show care and concern over the child.
你就让他一个人独自在那个地方。
And you leave a child there on his or her own.
好，那当然，如果按照字面上意思的话，就是好像说我们不要让小孩子独自在一个地方，父母要带他们出去玩就要出去玩，去买菜就要买菜。按照字面意思好像是这样子哈。
So it seems we take this phrase literally. It teaches us that we shouldn't leave a child alone at home. We need to take them out for to do things outside.
但事实上哈，我觉得中文翻的蛮不错的，它是意思的翻译，它就说放纵，就是说你不要管他啦，让他想做什么就做什么，意思是这样哈。
However, I feel that the Chinese translation, which renders the actual underlying meaning, which is you let the child indulge himself, so you let the child do whatever he wants.
我前阵子有看到一篇新闻哈。
So a while back, I read a newspaper article.
有些妈妈哈，她迷上了这个手机啊。
The article mentions how some parents are addicted to their phones.
好，那当然就忽略到小孩子哈。
And because they're addicted to their phone all the time, and therefore they neglect their children.
那结果这个小孩子哈，啪就爬到窗户啊，没不注意就从楼上面摔下来了。
And so because of the parents' neglect, they didn't pay attention. So this child climbed and in their house towards the window and then fell out the window.
哇，那真的是很悲剧啊！哈，让做妈妈很懊悔，那你来不及了。
And therefore, a tragedy happened to this family. And even though the mother was so regretful and so sorrowful over this incident, but it was already too late.
有一次我到了一个信徒家。
Once I went to visit a member's home.
那我觉得很有意思的说，小孩子自己有小孩子的房间哈。
And I found for this particular family, there was something quite interesting, that their children all had their own rooms.
但是他们的书桌全部都放在外面，就是客厅外哈，有一些空的地方就排几个书桌啊，小孩全部在那边读书。
So even though the children had their own individual bedrooms, but then their study area, their study table is set up not in their bedrooms, but out in a common area in their home.
那我当然我好奇了，如果你这样做，你们大人不是很不方便吗？想要看电视也不能看啊，对不对？
So I was actually quite curious with this arrangement, and I was wondering, wouldn't it be quite inconvenient for the parents because when they need to watch television, they won't be able to do so.
那当然，这做爸爸的这个弟兄他就跟我说
but the father shared with me.
他说因为小孩子他们学校做功课一定要上电脑，一定要到网络去查资料。
So the father shared with me that because when the children, when they do their schoolwork and their assignments, they need to go on the internet to research.
那到一个就是说在公共的空间他们做这些事情的时候就公开的 不要让他们有所谓的这种想要去看一些有的没有的这些东西哈，这些不好的东西的这种的想法了哈。
And he shared that because the study area for the children is now set up in a common area in the family home, and therefore this prevents the children having this mindset where they would search or go onto the internet and search for inappropriate and look at inappropriate things.
啊，他们有时候在休息的时候也会上网嘛哈，也看看东西啊，大人也看得到他们在干什么这样哈。
And in the children's break time, they would also be on the internet. They would look at different things, and whatever they search, then the parents are also aware.
我觉得这个家长哦，蛮有智慧的哦。
And I feel that this method by this parent is actually quite wise.
啊，你与其是那边一直在到他房间去盯他到底在干什么，还不如干脆在外面他公开的，那他也在比较小的时候不能够控制的时候，他学习怎么控制自己，这也是很好的方法。
I thought that was actually quite a good method, better than if they had their study area set up in each of their bedroom, and then the parents would always have to keep a very close eye in their bedroom what they do. So they set up the study area in the common area. So then when the children are younger, it also teaches them to restrain themselves in their internet activities.
当然，对家长来说，对父母来讲很不方便的哈。
And of course, this particular arrangement means it's quite inconvenient for the parents.
那我觉得这个方法很好哈。那我觉得这跟供大家参考看看哈。
But I find this arrangement by this parent is actually quite wise and very useful. So I thought I'll share this with everyone.
啊，当然哈，这个不是说你用账就对了，因为我们讲说那个账不是万灵丹的，就是不是说哦我只要用账就好了，不只是这样了哈。
And so about the rod of correction, it doesn't necessarily mean that every time you discipline, you need to use the rod of correction and that would fix everything.
应该是说你要加上培养他们自我尊重的心呐，哈。
But I think ultimately we want to cultivate in our children a sense of honoring themselves and respecting themselves.
对，那怎么做呢？首先哈，我觉得父母本身要成为值得儿女尊敬的一个父母了哈。
And so how do we cultivate this in our children? The first step is, as a parent, we need to be a parent that is respected by our children.
好，我们去看一下这个箴言的第17章哈。
Let's turn to Proverbs chapter 27.
17章哈。
Apologies, Proverbs 17.
啊，对，第6节。
Verse 6. Proverbs 17, verse 6. Children's children are the crown of all men, and the glory of children is their father.
后面这句话说，小孩子的荣耀是就是他们的父亲呐，哈。
And so the second part of this verse, the glory of the children is their father.
就是说，等他们谈到他们父母的时候，就有一个荣誉感，也觉得很引以为傲这样子哈。
Therefore, when the children, when they think about or talk about their parents, you can see this sense of pride that they have of their parents.
啊，就是我想这就最主要这个自我，我们所谓的就是要以身作则哈，其实这个蛮重要的了哈。
And therefore, as parents, it's actually extremely important for us to set examples first ourselves.
我记得我很早以前哈，曾经听一个传道这么讲。
And I remember quite early on there was a preacher who shared.
那这个 senior preacher 呢，他有一次说他到了一个教会去。
So this particular senior preacher shared that once he went to work in a particular church.
哇，那个教会参加聚会人数很少。
And in this particular church, the attendance of service by the members is actually very low.
但是很多小孩子来参加。
And he noticed that among those attending, there were a lot of children.
那因为很多信徒都住在教会附近，所以走路就可以到，所以小孩子自己就走路来到教会嘛。
And because for that particular church, a lot of the members stay nearby the church, and so the children of these families would come and attend service on their own.
那个传道就问他们说：“哎，你们爸爸妈妈呢？在家看电视。”
So this senior preacher would then ask the children one by one and said, "Where are your parents?" And the children reply, my parents are at home watching television.
因为聚会那个时间刚好就是那个连续剧最好的那个时段，8点到9点那个是最好看的时段哦。
Because the time for service is actually the same time slot where they show on the television a very popular drama series.
哇，那这个本来是聚会，感觉要上幼年班了。
So initially, the preacher was meant to conduct services at church, but it feels like he was actually conducting an RE class.
那过了一段时间，那些小孩都不来教会了。
And he noticed that after a period of time, the children stopped coming to church.
小时候爸爸叫你去，你就去，乖乖去。但是等到心里面骂说，你都不来，都叫我来。
And when they were younger, the children were obedient in that when their parents told them to go to church, that they would follow suit. But as they grow older, they would question in their heart, you tell me to go to church, but you yourself are staying at home.
所以到后来呢，等到他自己有主见的时候，我根本为什么要来？你都在看电视，我为什么要来教会？好，对。
Therefore, when they're grown, they have their own mindset. Then they would question and they would refuse to come, seeing that the parents themselves don't attend.
好，我想这个原则是蛮重要，就是说你要培养他一个自尊心。首先，我们父母可能要成为他们的榜样，这个是大家互相勉励的哈，包括我在内哈。
And therefore, what is very important as we try to cultivate a sense of self-respect in our children, it's important for parents to set an example. So myself included, let us encourage each other to work towards this.
好，那我们刚才讲用杖管教小孩，其实杖如果用多了，感觉好像在奴役一样哈。
And so just now we mentioned about using the rod of correction to discipline our children, but then the more we use the rod of correction, it seems that the relationship is like a master and slave.
那其实这个方法不能常常用了哈。
And therefore, the method of using the rod of correction is not a method that can be used all the time.
所以应该反过来讲，我们要装备他们哈。
So what we should do instead is we need to learn to equip our children.
那装备他们就是让他们行事很稳健，就是做事情非常稳定哈，处事为人非常稳定的。
And we need to teach and equip our children so that they are very steady in terms of handling events in their life.
我们看一下这个箴言第3章
Let's turn to Proverbs chapter 3,
21节
verse 21. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 21. My son, let them not depart from your eyes. Keep sound wisdom and discretion.
23节
Verse 23. Then you will walk safely in your way, and your foot will not stumble.
那再请看一下第4章
And let's also read chapter 4,
第8节
verse 8. Chapter 4, verse 8. Exalt her, and she will promote you. She will bring you honor when you embrace her.
第9节
Verse 9. She will place on your head an ornament of grace, a crown of glory she will deliver to you.
再看12节
Verse 12. When you walk, your steps will not be hindered, and when you run, you will not stumble.
好，刚才读了这么多经节，我做个简单的整理了哈。
So all these Bible verses we have read, let's organize them.
第一个你会看到它的有那个形容那个脚在走路，有没有？脚在走路哈。
And firstly, we see the description about feet walking.
好，譬如12节说，4章12节说，你行走脚步不至于这个狭窄，奔跑不至于跌倒，就想形容这个走路有没有哈？
For example, it's described about walking in a path, chapter 4, verse 12. When you walk, your steps will not hinder. When you run, you will not stumble.
那3章23节也是一样，你要坦然走路嘛哈。
The same with chapter 3, verse 23, walking safely in your way.
一般讲圣经在讲走路哈，它有个特别的用法哈。
Generally, when the Bible uses the action of walking the way, there's a particular meaning.
因为他们的路哈，除了这个王道哈，那 King's Way， 除了那王道是特别开出来的，其他路都是走出来的。
In the olden times, apart from the King's Way, which is man-made, or specially built, the other paths or ways are formed by walking.
一般他们讲 King's Way 就是说这个城门口打开，那一直这个 这个最直最宽的路一直通到皇宫，这个叫做 Kingsway 嘛。
So Kingsway in Israel is the way to this from this when the city gate opens, and from the city gate it reaches the palace.
也不只是以色列啊，就当时你看旧的这些城堡，大概都是这样子安排了。
Apologies, it's not just in Israel, but in the ancient times, all the structure of the castle, this was how it was organized.
那其他的路呢，都是人走出来，就是你走就形成了这一条道路啊。
So the other ways aside from the Kingsway, the other ways are all formed by trodding on by footsteps.
所以当你在讲行走，代表说你常常在走，常常在做的事情。你看，简单这么说，常常做的事情。
And therefore, when the Bible uses the phrase walking along a particular way, it also represents the things that you do every day.
所以其实教导他们要怎么，就从每一天的行走，每一天要做什么事情开始啊。
So this teaches us that the teaching needs to start from the things we do every day.
所以你看到一个人稳定，这个人很个性很稳定，是因为他每天都这样，所以他产生一种他的性格哈。
And therefore, when we see someone with a very steady character, it's because normally day to day, they are already doing this, and so this becomes part of their character.
那个小孩跟父母其实有一个很长的时间一个重叠期。
So the time that parents spend with their children, there is a large number of overlapping time.
等于说这个重叠代表说你父母所行的哈，这个每天所行的会深深影响到小孩子啊。
And so what I mean by overlapping time is that whatever the things that the parents do, there's a large portion of the time that what the parents do every day would affect our children.
我曾经听我小孩哈讲过，他们有其中一个同学哈。
So I've heard from my children, they mentioned one of their classmates.
就是阿公阿嬷那一代就是很早就结婚哈。
So for this particular classmate, they said that their grandparents' generation, they married quite young.
但是因为不成熟，所以后来就离婚哈。
But because they married when they're very young, still immature, therefore they ended up with a divorce.
就他的同学的父母也是这样子哈。
And this was the same for the classmates' parents.
就他们整个亲戚很多都是这样子哈。
And the same happened in a lot of their family relatives as well.
但是他的那个同学的妈妈哈，后来想说，我不能够再这样子了哈。
However, this particular classmates, the mother of this classmate, decided that they cannot continue like this anymore.
因为你知道离婚之后嘛，这个就刚好回到婆婆这阿嬷她家里哈，那阿嬷就帮她带这些小孩子。
So for this family, because they went through a divorce, so the family ended up staying at the maternal grandmother's place.
那他同学妈妈就开始奋发的开始去读书这样的哈。
So this classmate's mother, after the divorce, then she had to restart everything and started to study, go back to study.
对，从这个大学，然后读到master， 后来读 PhD 哈。
Starting from tertiary education to getting her master's and then getting her PhD.
然后最后来就在政府机关找到一个很好的工作。
And later on, she managed to find a very good job in the government department.
那整个家庭才开始哇，从这种泥沼当中走出来哈。
And so that was how she was able to there's a turning point for the family.
这当他的他同学的妈妈那个是特例。其他亲戚并不是这样子的哈。
So this particular classmate and the mother's example is the rare example. For the rest of the family is not the case.
那所以有时候你会觉得为什么一代都一样会这样，就是因为父母亲会影响到小孩子。
So sometimes we would wonder why. It is the same thing that happened one generation after the next generation. It's because of the parents' influence over their children.
那除非说你要花很大很大的力量，才有可能不要被复制那种父母的那个 pattern 嘛，哈。
Unless one generation decides they want to need to be different and make a difference, and they have to use a lot of effort to try to get out of that pattern.
好，那对我们这个父母来讲，我们就是原来我们日常所做的跟日常所讲的，都会造成我们下一代的一个好像复制你所做所说的这样。
And therefore, as parents, it is important to be reminded that the things we say day to day and the things we do every day has this replicating effect on our children.
所以4章第八节说你要高举智慧，他就是你高升。对。
And therefore, in Proverbs chapter 4, verse 8, we need to exalt wisdom, and she will promote you.
好，然后怀抱智慧，他就使你尊荣。
When you embrace wisdom, that she will bring you honor.
当然，这个智慧不只是属世的应该是更是讲属灵的智慧了。
And this wisdom, not just referring to worldly wisdom, but it also refers to spiritual wisdom.
因为神所给的尊荣，不是说你这社会地位多高啦，或是家里多有钱啦，这个不是神给的尊荣了。
Because the honor which God bestows on someone is not dependent on how wealthy you are or how high status you have.
但是你会确实这个在走上信仰的道路当中，那个尊荣就是你对神越来越把握，然后呢，就即使碰到挫折，也不会丧失信心。
But the honor that is bestowed on someone when they walk this way of faith is that when they're faced with difficulties and challenges, they have this confidence in God.
那这种自信心绝对不是说是一种因为我的成就得来的自信，是一种从神那边来的所谓的信心自信。
This confidence and assurance that things will be all right is not coming from a self-confidence, but it comes from God.
好，那这个是我们讲的所谓的这个装备他们，使他们在这个形势很稳健。
So this is about how to equip our children so that when they deal with matters in their life, they will be very steady in their character.
好，我们再看一下第3章第1节。
Let's continue to read chapter 3, verse 1. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 1. My son, do not forget my law, but let your heart keep my commands.
这里有个说这个那个法则
And so here mentions law.
他的意思是说你有一个应当要完成，或是你必须要做完的一些事情。
Which refers to there's certain things that needs to be completed.
所以说你有些事你应该做的，或是你应该完成的，你应该做或是应该完成这样。
So there are certain things that we ought to complete.
或是 you should 的你应该
should complete.
对。那这种事情应该就是一个是很正确的对的事情了一般是这种是正确对的事情
So there are things we should complete, and this generally refers to things that are good and correct.
所以一般我们父母会要教导小孩你应该不是说你不要做，不只是说你不要做这个不要做的，跟他说你应该怎么做，所以这是一个很基本的教导
So one of the very basic ways we need to teach our children is not to teach them they should not do this or that, but rather we should teach them they should be doing this or that.
曾经我跟一个弟兄在聊天，他这么讲
Once I had a conversation with a brother.
就是他说他小孩大之后
And he said that when his
小孩长大之后
after his children grow up.
就是自从念大学之后
when after his child started university.
他要求他小孩说，不管去哪里，一定要跟父母报告说你在什么地方。
So he made a request to their children that no matter where they are, no matter where they go, they at least need to tell their parents where they are.
那不是说你父母不想放心，不是这个原因的
So it's not because the parents don't trust or their children.
他是要训练他小孩子，你要对你的家人负责。
But he gave this instruction to his children is to train his children so that they have this mindset that they need to be accountable and feel responsible for their family members.
意思是说，当家人还没有担心你的时候，你已经主动说我在这里。
is to teach them that even before the family members start to worry about them, the child already knows and tells the family members where they are.
那这样的想法会一种变成一种惯例啦，或一种习惯。
So this, when you cultivate this, this will become a habit for them.
所以后来他们毕业了，找到工作，他们用这种态度跟他们的主管来工作，那主管就很喜欢他们。
So when they graduated and they started work, they used the same principles and in handling their work, so their manager is actually quite pleased with them.
对，就是他主管还没有想到的时候，他就告诉说：“哦，我已经做到这边，让你清楚知道说我现在情况怎样。”
And in the way they approach their work, before the manager start to ask them, they already reported to the manager, I have done this and I plan to do such and such.
那我相信每个家庭都有自己家里的规则哈。
So I believe that in every household you have your house rules.
啊，它这个规则有时候是每个家庭这个家庭的文化了哈，也不是说对错了，就每个家庭有自己家庭的文化哈。
And the house rules can differ from house to house due to cultural or background reasons.
但是这个规则不要只是一般的规则，更要进到所谓属灵的规则。
However, I feel that the house rules should not just stay as a and be restricted to just general rules, housekeeping rules, but it needs to extend to touch on spiritual rules.
比如说，有些妈妈哈，在小孩子很小的时候就叫他一定要默祷之后才能吃饭。譬如说，
For example, some mothers they would teach their young children that before they have their meal, they need to say a silent prayer.
然后讲一段，然后有些小孩子都会哭，不管，等到讲完才给他才喝牛奶这样。
So then, even if the young child is struggling and they are complaining, but the mother would disregard their responses and just insist on praying and say a few quick phrases and then let them eat.
然后长大一点的时候呢，这个小孩自己甚至带大家自己在一起祷告。
And then when the child grows up, and then the child would be able to start to lead the meal prayers.
还有曾经到一个信徒的家哈。
And also, I went to a family of our member once.
然后他们祷告完之后，在默祷之后哈。
So this particular family, after they have finished their Thanksgiving prayer before the meal.
那个小孩就会说：“爸爸吃，妈妈吃，谁吃啊？传道吃这样子哈。”他会要叫他们一定要讲这个话哈。
So this particular family, so after they have prayed, before they actually eat the meal, then they would actually call out each other and say, have dinner now, mom or dad, or when the preacher is there, they would say, preacher, let's eat now.
当然我也觉得蛮有趣的了哈。
So I found that actually was quite interesting as well.
那我想说，这个都是每个家庭它有在家庭的一个我们讲它的一个法则。那这个我们要给他们一个所谓的更不是只有一般的法则，更进一步到所谓属灵的法则哈。
So I find that it's useful to set up house rules in general as housekeeping rules, but then it's also more useful if those house rules is also touching on spiritual house rules.
它另外一个诫命哦，诫命的意思是说它规定你那有什么东西该做，什么东西不该做。
And so the word in this verse is commands, and commands is give you a boundary, showing you the things that you can do and things you can't do.
我想大家最能够理解就是10条诫命就是这个字嘛
So a very easy way to understand this word of commands is the 10 commandments.
里面然后有不可怎么样啊，有些是孝顺父母，要守安息日，这个就是要怎么样这样子
So among the 10 commandments, there would be thou shalt not do this and this and this. There's also from a positive way to honor our parents.
我想这个是很容易就理解的
So this is very simple to understand.
那我个人讲说，我们最后来看一节圣经节
So lastly, we can refer to a Bible verse.
看一下第3章第5节、第6节。
Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5 to 6. Verse 5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him and he shall direct your paths.
第7节。
Verse 7. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil.
所罗门给一个方向，就是说你要教导小孩，就是他怎么样仰赖神
So Solomon gave a direction in teaching our children is to teach them how to trust in the Lord.
那怎么样来顺从神的引导哈？
How do they submit to the Lord's guidance?
那怎么样顺服哈这个神所给的诫命哈？
How do they submit to the commandments God has given?
啊，简单说，我把这个大概分成3大类了哈。
So I categorized them into 3 categories.
第一个就是你要有遵守这个诫命的这种旨意的那个心呐哈。
So firstly, to build in our children a heart to keep God's commandments.
就第7节说要远离恶事嘛哈，遵守敬畏神，远离恶事嘛哈。
In verse 7, fear the Lord and depart from evil.
那第二个你要有智慧的选择的这种智慧，这种用智慧来选择神旨意的这种能力了哈。
And secondly, to teach our children to, through wisdom, to choose things relating to God's will.
对，那就是第6节所说的，在一切道路上认识神，他必指引你的道路哈。
Verse 6, in all your ways acknowledge him, he shall direct your paths.
那第3部分就是说，你要怎么顺服试验的旨意啊？
And thirdly, how do we submit to the testing of God's will?
对，就是试验神给你的一个熬炼哈 ，trial 那种熬炼哈。
So how to submit to God's trials?
那这个就是第5节上谈到的专心仰赖神，不要依靠自己聪明。
And that is verse 5, to trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on our own understanding.
那我想这3个部分，我在星期5的时候再跟大家讲的更详细一点。
So on these 3 categories, I will elaborate further on Friday night.
怎么样引导小孩去遵守神的诫命？
How do we guide our children to keep God's commandments?
怎么样来用智慧判断来选择神他所要他走的道路哈？
How do we teach our children that through wisdom to choose the path of God's will?
怎么样来顺服神在给他们的每一条道当中有那种试炼，这种可能他们不喜欢，但是他们怎么样去顺服哈？
How do we teach our children to submit to the various trials and afflictions which God may give them?
那这我们在星期5再讲哈。
So we will elaborate this further on Friday night
我们一
service.
起来唱诗
Now let us sing hymn,
442首。
hymn 442.